The 2022 NFL schedule is being released, and I really care about this. Ted, do you care about it?
I care about it for one big reason. I want to know what my broadcast schedule is going to be the first few weeks of the season on Sports USA, since we do double headers every Sunday. But
Ooh.
separate from that, I do care because I like to know the puzzle, how it fits, where those games are, how it affects those teams. And I think that is going to be one of the biggest keys to the over-unders for the year and how you guys feel from an odds standpoint, Ron.
Well, from my standpoint, it doesn't matter to me when Mahomes plays Aaron Rodgers and that kind of thing. What matters to me are the little things in the schedule, the little nuances where we can get handicapping advantages because of where it's placed in the schedule, what are the challenges for each team. And there's so many different things that I look at that I'll be talking about today and what Chris will be talking about today that hopefully will be kind of for the viewer, oh, I didn't think of that, let's look at that as well. So hopefully this will be kind of educational as to how we go about dissecting the schedule, which is coming out really quickly.
Absolutely.
The NFL betting has been very important to me for well over a decade. And honestly, I have to admit, there were years where I really didn't pay attention to the schedule flow. And it's only been over the recent 3 or 4 years where I've realized this schedule flow is extremely important. We already know which teams are playing which teams, but it's really important to know the basically how they fall in line. And, who's got the travel schedule, who's got the Thursday games that they have to go to, but are they divisional games? There's a lot of little nuance issues. Is it at the end of the season? Is it the 18th week or the 17th week in the season? Does the first year head coaches, do they have the tough games in the beginning of the season? Do they have the early season bye that helps them out? Where are the teams' bye schedules going to be? How many national TV games they have and so forth? And Ron, you probably have a toilet roll of other things you're looking at.
Well, and let's touch upon one of them right away, and that's the new coaches. There's a lot on their plate, and week to week, it takes all their time just to get ready from one opponent to the next. They can't make subtle changes if something's not working. So the example is Philadelphia last year, and we've given this on shows in the past, but this is important for new coaches, and people need to look at this. Philadelphia ran the ball 22 times per game in the first 5 games, and they couldn't get out of their own hold. Jalen Hurts wasn't ready to throw the ball 35, 40 times a game, and they suffered. They took a deep dive into what their own scheme should be after the mini bye and the full bye, which came early in the season. They made the playoffs, which nobody expected, and they ran the ball almost 39 times per game after that initial 22 times, and they led the league in rushing. That's what I'm going to be looking for initially. Where are the new coach buys? Because if it's week 10, they won't make adjustments.
Yeah, Chris, I'm wondering why it took you several years to even look into this, because I know Ron and I have been talking about this for decades, and yet, you're putting your money on the line for that. What was the transition for you to say, hey, wait a minute, this is really important?
I probably exaggerated a little bit. I would take a superficial look at the schedule, and I would know the broad points, but it's really finding, as Ron referenced, the nuance within the schedule. So there's just so many different levels of analyzing the schedule. We're going to see all kinds of charts out there. They're all going to be color coded, and various people release them, and that'll draw some interesting insight also. But there's just levels of looking at each team and how it's multi-layered against the other teams with more in-depth looks that I was not doing, that I feel is important to really pay attention to. Yeah. And as Ron will say, he makes these notations before the season even starts. So, as he's going week to week, you already know what you want to check out. You already know what you're looking at, right, Ron?
Yeah. So, part of this is dissecting season wins, divisional, and that's something that Chris, you probably got into more the last few years, and maybe that's why you weren't as deep into it before. But a lot of it is looking at, okay, I know what's going to happen in week 6. This team is going to play, they've just played 2 divisional games. Now they're going to play a team they haven't seen for 4 years or 8 years, completely out of conference. And then after that, they're going to play another divisional game that may be a revenge game from what happened 2 or 3 weeks ago. Where's that sandwich game situation that's going to come into play?
Yeah. And like maybe even a 2 or 3 out of 4 road games coming up, and one of them's on a short week, and all of that changes so much.
Yeah, Ron, you're right, because I am taking closer dives, because traditionally I was taking the summers off, and now that I've been here for a few summers, I'm paying closer attention to the season wins, where I wasn't doing that before. So, and the deep dive for the season wins is absolutely, you've got to really go down to the bottom to extract all that value. Do you, Ted? You're working with the NFL. How many years? What kind of rumblings do you get? What kind of feedback do you get from your NFL sources? What is important to them when they are looking at their schedules?
Well, totally. It's very important about the road when you're on the road, following maybe 2 straight weeks in home games against your own division. Then all of a sudden you're on the road 2 of the next 3 weeks against teams you haven't played in a while. Again, one of them might be a short week. And then all of a sudden it totally affects everything. And maybe even after that, because you might be worn out. Do you have a young quarterback who's learning at the time? There's so many factors there. But the people that I talk to within the league on a regular basis, this is something where they want to know what that schedule is, because this tells them what kind of maybe a start they can get off to. If you got a really tough first 4 or 5 weeks, that could screw your whole season up totally if you're not ready to go.
Do you think that too much is made over travel? For me, I think the travel is better organized. I feel that they stay in nice hotels, the nice accommodations. They get away from the wife and kids and the daily responsibilities. I'm not so sure travel is as big of a deal as it used to be in the past. What do you see with your eyes on the ground?
Well, for me, I agree with that statement to a point. What I'm more interested in is rest differential. And a lot of people come out with that information. So you might see the Washington Commodores, with a +9 rest differential, which means that they had a bye week strategically placed. They had fewer primetime games, so they had a normal schedule. And then the Dallas Cowboys, which are going to play on Thursdays, they're going to play more primetime games. Maybe they have a -8 rest differential. So if you take the 2 combined, and Washington has games that are not as bunched up as Dallas, -9 to +8, that's more what I'm looking at, as opposed to how many miles they travel, because they all travel in first class accommodations. So
right.
That's not as important to me.
I think part of the issue, though, the actual travel itself, is the time of the games itself. Like if you got a West Coast team going to the East or an East going to the West, you're either saving time or you're losing sleep, and you're not on your normal body clock. And that sometimes comes into play because it's a short turnaround. They're not going there 4 days in advance. So sometimes that comes into play.
So you're finding the coaching and the players give you the feedback that that is an issue for them still.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's talk about revenge games. I'm going to make a statement. I want to get your opinions on it. To me, you had that controversial overtime game with Kansas City and Buffalo, and it was decided by a coin flip, according to a lot of people. And then you have the Kansas City Cincinnati, where Kansas City won the game, they were leading 21-3, almost 28-3, but they decided to go for it and they were stopped. And then Cincinnati came back. For those games, and they're going to play each other again this year, I'm going to argue that if those games are played in September or early October, I place more weight on the revenge motive than if they are played in December when the whole season is played out. They play 12 games. They're immersed in what's going on. What are your thoughts on that?
Totally agree.
Absolutely.
So much time goes by, you can't even get caught up into that because there's been so much in between games. It really is just old news by then. And it's the kind of thing the fans talk about. It's like when there's rivalry games, but it's more of a rivalry in the stands than it is on the field, sort of that kind of a thing. So the media and the fans will talk about it, and the players just say, hey, this is an important game. Let's go.
Chad, what is do divisional rivalries have the same luster that they had 20 years ago growing up? I mean, do you see the teams getting fired up like they used to?
No, I do see occasionally. I think it's circumstantial because if Dallas plays Philadelphia in week 12 and the game means nothing, nobody cares. But if it means a lot, then I think that's where you beef up the emotions a little bit, and some of that comes through. But I very circumstantial.
If it's bad blood between coaches like Carroll and Harbaugh for those years, that's interesting. Maybe Baltimore, Pittsburgh, that's a rivalry no matter what happens. But you're right. Most of these they're just trying to get through game by game. And, next game is always the most important game, as Bill Belichick would say, on to Cleveland, on to wherever.
Cincinnati.
So on to Cincinnati. That's what he says.
I've had the same kind of feeling as that for a few years now, that I just don't think the Bears and the Lions get fired up because it's a divisional game, unless it's, on a Monday night or a Thursday or something, Thanksgiving type situation.
Success too comes into play, don't you think, as well? We got two teams that are both 4 under 500.
Yeah.
A little tough to get psyched up for just another game in your division.
Exactly. One thing I'd like to point out is strength of schedule. Going to share the screen as soon as I can find it here.
Yeah, that's great.
This is from CBS. They just released this, and this is NFL strength of schedule based on opponents' 2021 win percentage. And this is a nice chart to look at, but we're not in 2021 anymore. And Ron, I'm going to let you point out the differences between basing it on strength of schedule and using the Pythag and what your incoming team ratings would be compared to what this chart will look like.
Yeah. Teams are completely different. Player movement is more massive than ever when we've seen quarterbacks switch, wide receivers being traded on draft day, before draft day. You got Devontae Adams. You had two different wide receiver Browns. You had quarterback Russell Wilson traded. So you can't use what happened last year. And with Pythag, when you had teams like Atlanta that were actually worse than advertised because they would have been 1-15 in the first 16 games if you took out one-score games, their win record was not really what you saw in the printed line. And then you have turnover differentials, what was random and what was not random. And then you have fourth place schedules versus first place schedules. You really can't use this. And what I use is when I make up my preliminary power ratings for each team, that's how I devise strength of schedule. Now, having said that, you can see that they're not going to be wide differences. The last four teams, if you can read this, are New York, Philadelphia, Washington, and Dallas. So the whole division is considered pretty much, it doesn't matter whether you have a first place or fourth place schedule. Now, my ratings may change from that. I'm sure they will change from that, but it's not going to be a drastic change. What you're more looking for is Cincinnati goes from fourth place schedule in 2020 to 2021 to a first place schedule. And according to this, has the third toughest schedule. And we know they're going to play a lot of first place opponents. And then Baltimore, for the first time in a long time, has a fourth place schedule. They're listed 23rd, regardless of whether or not that's exact, you know there's going to be a pronounced difference between those two teams and their schedule.
I think there's going to be how many different. I mean, it's pretty much unlimited the number of strength of schedule charts that you can actually see.
Yeah.
Based on what information you want to use to create the charts. But I think what is most important to remember is this chart here is going to end up being the most useless chart. There couldn't possibly be a more useless chart, is there?
Yeah. If you use this chart, you're one step behind in terms of recognizing value. And I think that's an important point to make. And we can piggyback on that. And Chris and I think, Ted, you and I have had this conversation offline. When a game is played matters. If Detroit plays at Green Bay week 3, we're probably going to say there's a 9 out of 10 chance that Green Bay wins the game at home against Detroit. But if Detroit plays at Green Bay week 18, the final week of the season, is that really more than 50-50? Because Green Bay may rest every starter like they did last year. And so you change your season win perspective. At least I would change my season win perspective based on when that game is played. I would bump up Detroit and bump down Green Bay if that game was played on 18. Half a game.
We used to talk about that when we would sit down for our long lunches and go over every single team and every single schedule. Yeah. And they were like basically half games. It's like, okay, if we saw them as an 8-win team and it's week 17 and it's Detroit, now it's an 8.5-win team.
Yeah.
That
exactly. And, that's a hidden nuance that people have to realize. Week 1 results, for example, are crazy. We've seen San Francisco win week 1, not win again until week 17. Whatever happens on week 1 can usually be thrown out. We've seen weird scores because of lack of readiness, whatever the case may be. And now we only have 3 preseason games. So even week 1 games can be skewed in terms of, do you really know who's going to win week 1?
Yeah. By the way, Chris, real quick, I don't know where everybody gets their biases from the strength of schedule, but over the years, and I mean many years, I don't look at anything because my bias is what Ron gives me. Because I don't really that's the truth. I mean, I haven't paid attention to other ones because I trust what he's giving me, and the other ones don't mean anything. I'm not going to put 4,000 things in my head and say what site is doing what.
No, I agree. And to touch on what Ron was saying, we talked about it last year with the Redskins or the Washington. Not only do you have to evaluate what one team is going to do, but you have to evaluate what another team might do. And I thought it was extremely likely when you're looking at season wins in that division that Washington was going to go on a bad start. I mean, I thought they would potentially they could have been like 1 or 2 wins going into their bye week, and they might still have only had 1 or 2 wins by week 10 or 11. And they didn't start off much better than that. So if you think that can happen, well, then who's in that pathway scheduled there? And how does that affect, a domino into other season wins? Because if you can really just key in on 1 or 2 or 3 teams, and you're pretty sure that this team's defense was, completely overrated. They played an easy schedule and they're going to flame out this year. And you need to kind of apply it to some of these other teams and say, nah, I don't think they're going to be this good. And it creates a domino effect into what the other teams are going to do.
Yeah. And let's put fatigue in the factor too, as another thing to look at, if not for season wins, for divisional races or for what you might hone on later in the season. When Tom Brady first went to Tampa, they had their bye after the first 12 games were played. There was definite fatigue happening weeks 10, 11, 12, and they started, not surprisingly, 7-5, got the full week bye, got the chemistry going, and never lost the rest of the season. That's one example. Second example was Kansas City last year with an all-new offensive line. Whoever played them early in the year, to Chris's point about it matters when you play a team, and if you look at one team, you should look at its effect on other teams. Whoever got to play Kansas City early had a benefit, because once that line gelled, especially after any bye weeks they had, Kansas City and Andy Reid, known for going on really massive good win runs, got everything together in the second half of the year. So when you played Kansas City did matter.
Yeah, and the other thing, though, I think is important, though, is, and I mentioned it before, the start of your schedule. The first handful of weeks, if you are a team on the bubble of are we going to be decent or not, and you have a tough schedule, it is mentally and emotionally exhausting to the team. If they get off to a 2-5 start and they're not going to be that good anyway, they're probably screwed the rest of the year. And I think the beginning of the schedule is really important to a lot of teams that are, maybe not, certainly not an elite club.
Yeah, I agree 100%. You have to kind of look at which teams have a reasonably decent shot of sputtering that you wouldn't necessarily expect them to sputter. Yep. And then the domino effect that would happen to their interaction with other teams. And to touch on your point, Ted, when people are talking midway through the season and toward the end of the season about the strength of schedule played, they'll do the same thing that this chart just did, where they're going by win percentage or this team's won this many games. And they're not taking into a factor, okay, they played these teams, but what was the exact scenario? Who was injured? What was the dynamics? What was the state of mind of that great team when they played it? Did they get the maximum effort, or did they get we just showed up effort? All those dynamics get just absolutely compounded, and they're important. It sounds like minutia, but it's not. It's
not at all. No, and I think the word, I used it earlier, circumstantial, is extremely important when it comes to the schedule and where it is in the schedule.
NFL players and coaches are creatures of habit. They like the same routine week after week after week. So with that being said, here are three teams that I'm looking at, and I'll tell you why, and you guys can comment on that. Cincinnati, Arizona, and San Francisco. These teams are used to not playing primetime games. And now, just like Cleveland has underachieved when their spotlight was right on them in 2 of the last 3 years, Cincinnati's going to presumably have more primetime games. We're going to find that out, and I'm going to be very interested not only in what their primetime games are, but who they play the week after that game, the letdown game. Arizona, maybe more primetime games. They caught they may have caught a few teams last year when the other teams had short rest, but Arizona had a normal schedule. And then you got San Francisco. Maybe they're used to primetime games, but now they have a brand new quarterback in Trey Lance, who isn't used to being under the spotlight, and he's going to have to adjust to this and playing under the spotlight. Those are the three teams off the top of my head that I'm going to look at. What are their schedules and how much of a bump in prime time are they going to have? What are you guys' thoughts?
And I'm also thinking the European trips this year. There sounds like there's a couple more than average, right? This year,
5.
And how that's going to affect everything. Where are those going to fit in the schedule puzzle?
They're Thursdays too.
Yeah. So, you're talking about totally changing everybody's clock on that one. So you got 2 teams affected by each game. And what about their next game? Even though we know that they'll have a longer week, who do they play? Then they go back on the road again? That kind of stuff.
And let's not forget too, I'll tell you, when you're a mediocre team that has some talent, and you've got one of the big dogs coming in on a Monday night or Thursday night primetime game, Ted, aren't you finding that those teams really do want to, do their very best and really put forth their best effort?
Absolutely, and that's where you might get some value, because the the spread, especially in a primetime game, the favorite is going to be jacked up a little bit. I want the extra whatever you're going to give me on the dog as far as the spread's concerned. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And another point, when you looked at teams like Seattle and some of these other teams toward the end of the season, some of these games would have played entirely differently if they were played on a Sunday afternoon versus a Sunday night or a primetime game.
Totally.
Ron, I remember you shared some insightful thoughts on the different dynamics that happen. Playing daytime kind of obscured. People are paying attention versus primetime.
Yeah, we had a couple of examples that were really profitable last year where teams would not have been psyched up as much, but they got that chance to play on a Monday. It would have been a trap game situation. In case I don't have the specific example off the top of my head, but it really does matter that a particular game has even the flex scheduling. We see what the schedule is now, but we have to realize that some of these teams' schedules may change from week 11 on out. Because if a team was expected to be good, they don't want them on the Sunday night broadcast anymore, and everything changes. And teams that had their hopes up, all of a sudden they're going to go through the motions on that Sunday because it's a Sunday day game instead of a Sunday night game. Yeah. These are things that we can't chart right now, but we put in the back of our minds so that when it does change in the middle of the season, we're ready for it.
Yeah, the other side of that one as well, though, as we know, as the flex schedule goes, they're looking for teams in contention and teams that are more of the elite to go into prime time. So most of that won't affect the average team because they weren't going to be there in the first place.
Yeah, that's true. Any final thoughts before we call it, put a wrap on this?
I've got a hidden kind of thing that maybe people don't think about. And that's, let's say you're a team and you played 3 straight running quarterbacks, weeks 1, 2, or 3. And you're looking all of a sudden and you chart it out and say, wow, this team is now allowing 55% passing. Teams are having a tough time passing on them. Maybe it's because of who they played and not because they're a great defensive team. And it could be vice versa as well. Somebody they played Tom Brady, who's a 70% passer. They played Kirk Cousins, who's a 70% passer. In the past, they played Drew Brees, who's a 75% passer. So if you look at the stats as a whole, you say, wow, we've got 3 or 4 games already, and they suck on defense. Maybe they don't. So I think a hidden variable that people should look at is where are the running quarterbacks versus the passing quarterbacks? Where are the teams that are heavy run that they played versus the teams that are not heavy run? And keep in mind that you may find some play on or play against situations based on how the schedule is laid out because of who they face. And these are really hidden factors that people don't think about.
I have a hidden one.
Go ahead, Ted.
I was going to say my hidden factor is because it hasn't happened yet, but you watch in the next few years, I got a feeling that when the schedule comes out, it's going to be another either primetime show or 2-day show when they say, okay, Detroit Lions fans, your schedule's coming out. They make a big production out of it, just like the draft. That's my prediction.
I was under the impression that it is a TV show Thursday, isn't it?
It's not quite yet that. I mean, we've already, they're leaking stuff out here and there, and you know how that works.
Well, very good. Then we put a bow on this one. We're all looking forward to it, and it's going to take a long time to really go through this stuff. I'm in no rush to be running to the windows with stuff because I think it's going to be very time-consuming to absorb it all. But yes. We'll be back when we have something new to comment on it. For Ted and Ron, thanks for joining us, and have a great day.
Love it.